This recording is from the All Island Women's Forum Residential in November 2023. The forum is made up of 40 women from across the island who come together to examine issues in areas of commonality, north and south, and identify key areas that can be addressed on an all-island basis. The All Island Women's Forum is an inclusive space for women's voices, including those often left out of the conversation from minority communities. The forum has been an important space to foster greater all-island partnerships and model the potential for greater cooperation across the island of Ireland. My name is Rachel Coyle. I'm head of campaigns and mobilization in the National Women's Council, and I'm lucky to have been part of the journey of the All-Island Women's Forum since 2022. This is a recording of a discussion between forum members on the topic of violence against women. Violence against women is a problem in every community and is experienced by women of every class and race. It's a global problem stemming from a system of male dominance and patriarchy. And this session was an opportunity for the forum to gain insight into the scale of violence against women on this island and its impacts on different communities. That morning session began with a presentation giving a brief overview of violence against women on a global and all-island scale. I want to give a bit of a trigger warning about the session as we're going to be discussing topics that you might find difficult. On the panel, we had Orla O'Connor, the director of the National Women's Council, Salome Mbugua, a researcher, gender equality activist, and human rights advocate, who's also the CEO of AkiDwA, the Migrant Women's Network Ireland. Next, we had Collete, who's worked with LGBT Ireland since 2017 as the Senior Training and Advocacy Manager. We were delighted to get to know Friel a bit better that day. Anne is the Assistant Project Manager and Primary Healthcare Coordinator of Donegal Travellers Project. And last but certainly not least is Eileen Weir, Greater North Belfast Women's Network Coordinator and Shankill Women's Centre. I hope you enjoy.
I think you will agree that this is an incredibly strong panel to kind of start our discussions about how violence against women impacts on communities differently and how women are supporting one another and campaigning to end this violence. So maybe, if you don't mind, Orla, as director of the National Women's Council, like we've seen the scale of violence against women here, how do you feel about that and what do we do about this?
I mean, I think in some ways it's not surprising that, back I think when the forum was about a year in existence, we all collectively identified this as being such an important issue. And it's an issue as well that we know has no borders. Historically, domestic violence in particular was an area where women's groups, North-South, really did come together in terms of supporting women who needed refuge, who needed safety, but also was the case where perpetrators really manipulated the border. So I think there's a real, this issue I think really does put itself at the heart of how we work together, North-South. Yeah, I think, for me anyway, and for the Women's Council, that's why I think it's really important that we're having this discussion. But I think there's a few things as well in the statistics that you've put forward. I mean, one of the things in the South at the moment is it's really good to be in a position now to have a prevalence study for sexual violence. It's something we campaigned for a long, long time because there was just no sense of, beyond all of the different information from frontline services, what was the actual position. And we've campaigned strongly for that as well in terms of domestic violence. We don't have that similar piece in terms of the North, and I think that's a really big gap. Because it is hard to know, when we talk about the increase, we don't know, is that an increase of people reporting, of women reporting? And that's obviously, a positive thing in some ways in terms of reporting, but we don't actually know. And it makes it difficult, I think, in terms of how we bring together, like how we address the needs. But also, I think the other bit for me, maybe just to put in at this point, is the other forms of, so we're talking about sexual violence, we're talking about domestic violence, and then, talking about pornography, talking about prostitution, talking about FGM, there is a real need to have that very broad definition of what we're talking about when we're talking about gender-based violence. And I think that's something that we also can do together, North-South, in a much stronger way maybe than what we're currently doing. So just maybe to throw that in at the start.
Yeah, no, and Salome, I suppose as the CEO of AkiDwA, when we reflect on those figures, how would you say that your own community is impacted?
Actually, it's very shocking, when you see those numbers in lighting, because those numbers are not just numbers. They are people, these are human beings, who maybe some of them have lost their life through violence. And it's also very challenging because even as I sit here, I'm imagining Women are always on the move, and we know so many women are moving now. They are sexually exploited and abused on their journey before they even get to countries of destinations. So these numbers, we may say that, they are high numbers, but we don't have the numbers. Because you also have a lot of people who don't report. So for sure, I know from our work in AkiDwA that most women actually, and I was going to talk about that later, don't even want to come forward because of the cultural issues, the cultural background of where they're coming from. Going to report your husband or your partner to a gadi or to a police, what will happen. Also, what will happen with the families and the community, the fear of being alienated, from the rest of the community. So reporting is a key major problem that we have. So for us, putting the statistics of 6,000 women being subjected to female genital mutilation, and bearing in mind also how there are so many women being trafficked even as we speak now. That Ireland, for example, is a country of transit. We have a lot of women coming to the south and then to the north, and then I don't know where. They're being moved around like animals. It's not like they're even human beings. And really, we need to be supported, to talk about issues of violence, like Orla have said, in a broader manner, because we cannot say just domestic violence is wrong. All these forms of violence against women are wrong. And when you come to migrant women, they can be very, very hidden. And all of us, maybe most of us here are running about this other, we are trying to become more aware of these other forms of violence against women, like early enforced marriages, where Ireland have not even tackled the problem. Yeah. And yet we know girls are being moved around. We have, for example, different, organizations now in communities working on this issue. Issue of early enforced marriage is a reality in Ireland, not from before, but from what is happening now, and especially with the young girls being moved around. So when I look at those numbers, I feel very cheated. I feel those numbers don't reflect the reality, because there are more and more women and girls who are being exploited, abused, and everything wrong happening to them. And at the same time, those numbers are not captured. And I still feel like we still have a very long way to go. Yeah. But also, and we will talk later, I would really like us to focus more on prevention of these things happening. And also pushing the state to address, like when we talk about trafficking, the traffickers, we don't get to hear more about them and what is being done to them, to stop this trafficking business. Because they're making money out of it, Right. And Ireland is making money too.
Anne, I wonder, just in terms of the, I suppose, violence against women in the traveller community, when you think about its impact, but in particular, what would you say are the barriers facing traveller women in accessing support?
Well, the statistics that you brought showed earlier on, where travel women overused or multiple times access the refuges, and that's not surprising, because I do believe it's a quality of access, but it's also a quality of outcome. Working as a community development worker, and we do have a domestic violence project within our organisation, the particular challenges that travel women do face all around Ireland, the intersectionality lens as well of being a woman, and then being based on your gender, but also based on your ethnicity. There is particular barriers for travel women accessing services, even from the Gardaí, calling out to the home. If you live in a site, we know stories where Gardaí would use this as an opportunity to check for tax insurance, where that leaves a woman in another bad situation with extended family. We know where they maybe tend to house with domestic violence, and they'd use it for a search as well as the property. And we do know it depends on what part of the country you come from, and it's really where it shouldn't be, but it's down to the refugees who lead on it, who work in its personality, and the willingness to give refuge to a travel woman. There's particular challenges in relation to access around this country, especially for travel women, of getting refuge. And I do anti-racism and anti-culturalism work for the last 20 years, and a lot of the time people would say, but sure, traveller culture, it's part of your culture. Domestic violence is culture element of travellers, or men are inherited to be violent towards women, which is factually untrue. We know in the south we don't have a universal data ethnic identifier. So normally, and then it's what people perceive who are members of the traveller community. If you don't fit the stereotypical view, or surname or address, it's hit and miss. So I think the data is there, and it's good we have data, but I don't know how accurate it is. Because people, it's all about self-determination. it's who you identify as, and I think sometimes in difficult situations, travellers will not identify, especially travelled women, will not identify as members of the travel community if they don't fit the stereotypical view. And we do have also, of women looking for support and access and service, especially have with children, because we do know of cases, I'm working on the ground where the fear of TUSLA and children were taken into care. And I've been in many situations, and unfortunately I have to say this in a day like this, where women in power would make accusations or statements about you as part of your culture to get bait, and an open setting where the life of a woman and her children is depending on what comes out of that meeting. So that's what women still face as a barrier.
Yeah. Collete, we don't hear an awful lot about violence against women in the LGBTQ plus community. So really fascinated to hear your sort of analysis, the impact in your community, and, do women from your community face barriers in accessing support?
I think quite similar to what Salome is saying about the absence in the data of our community. I think it's a real reality. Recently, the CSO included domestic violence, but talked about LGBT domestic violence. So that's really, we don't know what that means. So there's a piece of work to engage with them to get them to break it down more. But I think it's a difficult issue. Domestic violence per se is not a term that our community, for our community, it's a very heterosexual, heteronormative type of term. It's not one that we would identify with, and we wouldn't find it easy to kind of identify what I suppose is now called intimate partner violence within our relationships. If it's talked about in terms of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, we'll get more conversation on that, because that we can relate to that term. I suppose generally I would say we've had to fight so hard for our relationships. We rarely want to hang our dirty laundry in public. So it's a real taboo issue within our community. It's an issue that our community doesn't really like to talk about.
Yeah.
Just like it doesn't like to talk about other, sexually difficult issues, other difficult sexual violence or sexual exploitation issues within our community. They're difficult to talk about because people have had to work so hard to just get, the freedom to be who we are. So I think there's quite a lot of difficult historical stuff meshed up, as well as then just, I suppose, the fact that these issues are talked about very much in the majority frame of domestic violence and heterosexual kind of setups. Yeah. So those are just issues that make it hard for us to kind of just name it and say, it is happening. If, for example, a female couple do, seek support because they are in an intimate partner violence situation, it can be kind of tricky because they might both present to the same refuge. One perhaps, is the victim, and one is the perpetrator, but presenting also as a victim. So it can be kind of difficult to navigate that as well. And all of this is made extra difficult when, services aren't really, maybe openly talking about it, or we're not having conversations like this about it. I think a really positive initiative in recent months is the LGBTQ plus intimate partner violence kind of network. It's a small emerging thing, so I don't want to say it's up and running and open for membership. It's still evolving, but it's really important, and it's so, I suppose, overdue. Yeah. So finally, within some of the core national LGBT organisations, and then some of the core men's networks, and some of the core women's domestic violence services, we're all now talking about it in relation to LGBT plus experiences. So this is an amazing initiative, and I guess we're going to see hopefully more stuff happening as a result of that initiative. Can I just make one additional point though? Because every time I hear FGM now, another jumps into my mind, which is ITM, intersex genital mutilation, which is also gender-based violence, and it's the mutilation of intersex babies at birth to make them fit into the binary of male or female, and not allowing them to just be themselves and let them tell everybody else who they are when they have that vocabulary and when they have grown to know themselves to be either male or female or non-binary or whatever else, but they start life as intersex babies, but they, surgeries are performed on them, only 30% which are medically necessary. 70% of surgeries on intersex babies are in order to fit them into the gender binary, what we call cisnormative surgeries. So I think that's 1.7% of the population. 1 in 1,600 babies born is an intersex baby. It's the same percentage of the population that has red hair. That's how common intersex people are. So, every time I hear FGM, I also now think IGM in the same breath, because we need to start giving visibility
there's still
to
a lot of
that
work
as well.
to be done. I appreciate that, Collete. Thanks very much. And just to kind of pick up on something you were saying, because I think ultimately there is a culture of silence when it comes to domestic violence and violence against women more generally. When you were saying when communities are kind of used to being discriminated against, it makes it even more difficult to speak out. So, Eileen, you're coming here today from the Shankill. Would you say there's a culture of silence in your community around violence against women, and how do you mitigate against that?
Yeah, I would say because of the drug gangs that's labelled themselves paramilitaries, there's a lot of debt. I think poverty brings a lot of violence towards women as well. There's some cases I've heard of as shocking, where sisters of young lads who have been trafficked to pay off the debt of a drug debt. These are stories that I'm hearing, but these are not stories that somebody would come out and openly say for themselves. An awful lot of it's confidentiality. You can advise them what to do. We would be a conduit, as all women's centres are. We would work very closely with Women's Aid. So if somebody presents themselves in the centre, we will handhold them. And in some cases, just to ring Women's Aid's a big step. They don't want this to go out there, don't want this, but we encourage for them to get the face of the people who are trained to give that advice. Most of the women's centres, if not all, have all done Women's Aid's training. And a lot of the stuff that we've had and got over the years, it's been down to the lobbying of Women's Aid and the women's movement to actually get the changes in that law. And then we have a problem with the police force as well, where there's been in training for police officers attending the homes. But I'm probably more in my line of work looking at the prevention measures and what we can do to prevent that. And there's a couple of fantastic initiatives that have been done by Reclaim the Agenda and WRDA. It's Raise Your Voice, and that's training that goes out across all the communities, and it's free training, and they go into groups of women. And I have found groups of women that they have went out to actually starts that conversation. And then they have another training bit, is standby training. So if you see something, what do you do? How do you go about reporting it? How do you go and do it? But I think the crucial point is getting it onto our curriculum in a way that our young women and young men are actually educated that this is not right, this is wrong. I think we have actually been successful in going into schools with Raise Your Voice. I know that they have done a lot of the male sports clubs. They went into the rugby, junior rugby, Ulster Rugby. They done Raise Your Voice in the Ulster Rugby, and they've done it in a lot of the football clubs. We had a couple of footballers who actually were up in court for sexual harassment, and when the WRDA and Reclaim the Agenda approached those football clubs, they opened their doors for the training. So, although we're a women's organisation, we need to educate men, and particularly young men, on what's right and what's wrong, because a lot of it is like a culture thing. You know, that's the way men talk, that's the way we talk, that's how we treat women, you know, and it's trying to break those myths. We're 2023 and we're still talking about violence against women and girls.
Yeah.
And
so,
really,
you know, you mentioned prevention around, so training, education. And in your community, like, are there other preventative measures there? Are there things going on?
Yeah, there's at the moment there's Paddy Point has a funded project through TUSLA, and there's pilot projects basically set up to look at domestic violence within the community, but it's not to go and do the job of people who work in the sector of domestic violence. It is to build the bridge between the women and the services, because they're not working for travel women. That's the reality. When you have these many travel women going back and going back, they're probably repeated going back and back, because the quality of outcome is not the same. And we know women who are going back into the community, could be in the refuge for 12 weeks, 14 weeks, maybe 4 months, and go back to the situation they were in, because there's nothing else for them. Preventative work, we do that as an organisation across the country, and different organisations will do that as well. We have 28 primary healthcare projects set up across the country as well, who are members of the travel community working in the area of health, and also we look at domestic violence because of poor health inequalities in the travel community and poor life expectancy for travel women. And training, you know, Paddy Point has delivered a fantastic piece of training around domestic violence. We call on other organisations to enhance their own learning around domestic violence and gender-based violence. We create opportunities and space for travel women looking at violence. And at the moment we have a project running with 2 women who are members of the travel community, trained in the area of domestic violence, working within the community and doing a lot of the preventative work, and working with services to make them, and I know all the best policies in the world, but if they're not in practice, they mean nothing to the women's accessing that services of inclusion. So a lot of preventative work, but what we have to, Paddy Point has laid out, because they have a domestic violence project for many years, around the materials that's been provided for women in general. If you can't read and write, that's challenging. And 50% of my community still has issues with literacy. The Roma community, English is not their first language, so they're adapted in culture appropriate manner, and then they're given out through family visits. So it's looking at all things like that. Preventative, we do a lot of work on preventative work. I'm working with services, delivering training to try to make them more inclusive of the Roma travel community.
Very good. Sorry, Eileen, you wanted to come in there?
We're living in societies where, you know, we had a taxi driver that was done for rape, and when they looked into his record, he was at this from he was 14 years of age, and he's now in his 60s. You have to do the holistic approach. It's not just down to women, it's down to our courts as well to look and do it. Now, we don't know how many cases that taxi driver done over those years. He just has been caught. And women are scared and you have had it down south as well, where women can't even go and run in the park without the fear of being attacked and even murdered in some cases.
And Orla, I wonder, just like when we think about the prevention, that holistic approach, you know, the discussion here and the stats this morning, it seems like the scale is clear, but the political will sometimes doesn't match up. So, like, how do we better amplify the need to address this?
I mean, in the south, because there's the strategy which is there, which is ambitious, and all of the frontline services and all of our members have supported it, but it's a strategy, and it is about the implementation of that and how that happens. But I think in terms of, you know, how we do this on an all island, I think that it is a challenge because, okay, do you focus on the more, you know, the strategy, the vision, where we're trying to get to, because it is like the priority of this. So there's a particular moment, I think, in the south at the moment where this is more of a political priority. It's a moment. It wasn't there a few years ago. A new minister comes in, it won't you know, who knows where it'll be. So that bit to me is really important, because this falls off the agenda very quickly. So it is that piece about how can we work together to keep this as a priority, so that the impact of gender-based violence is understood in a way that makes people want to act. But I also think then there is a sort of second piece around activism. And, we spoke today about how can we do things maybe collectively? And there's definitely, I think, more of a space for that, both North and South, because I think we rely a lot on our legislation in the South, but there's huge cultural change that's needed. And that bit needs a lot of focus, and I think that is something that we can do together.
Really likely emphasize on what you are saying, because mainly the whole issue of cultural change is key if we are really going to do anything. And when you mention young men, and then I just remember about the case in Talamo of this young man who killed the mother and videoed everything. We really have to address this male aggression, the male hegemony, and that male aggression, because it's there. I think, hearing from work, for example, from AkiDwA, we've had so much women telling us now to engage men, that we really have to engage these men, because even if we empower them so much, we are empowering them with information. We are trying actually to help them to understand the dynamics and everything, and even support them seriously. But still, they continue to be violated by the same men. So I think it would be important to think really seriously, in both North and South, on how do we engage men and boys, on the whole issue of addressing violence against women, because we've been doing it on our own, but quite often they are the perpetrators, and we are not actually challenging the cause root of the problem. We need to do that.
Okay, and thank you everybody for your feedback, your contribution. And so I'm just going to kind of let everyone kind of speak at the, I think that concept of policies are great, but how do we make it an economic priority? Because these things have to be resourced. How do we amplify violence against women on an all-island basis? How does everything that we've been discussing here, and all of the intersections that we know, the complexities, how do these kind of feed into an all-island strategy? You think about your own work. From what I'm hearing from everyone, there is really no difference north or south in terms of the impact for victims, the scale of violence, but it may have an impact in terms of access to services, particularly if you're going to the other jurisdiction. We can talk about that at some other time. But what all-island action do you actually want to see in combating violence against women? So if it's all right, Collete, I might start with you, if you want to maybe just respond to some of what's been discussed here and just give us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, that was so rich. I think what I'm struck by personally is that at grassroots level, so much fantastic work is going on. Trans women are in refuges and there's no issue. There's a lot of very positive grassroots anti-racism and anti-traveller racism work happening. And yet it's so easy and so fast for far-right keyboard warriors or, racist keyboard warriors or homophobic keyboard, to really take over the narrative and dominate all of my thinking. I'll own, really bother me and, and kind of take up space everywhere on newspapers, on radio shows and all that. So I'm thinking about that and kind of going, how can we just keep going at the grassroots, keep holding the fort, but keep making more connections so that maybe that feels bigger than when you're in the storm of the hatred. I'm really struck as well by the fact that we need the men's networks and we need the men's groups to just and do the work. I'm really struck by that.
Yeah.
And more because of what we've all talked about, and we've talked about it all along in the All Island Women's Forum, the pornography. It's almost like the generation of men coming through are even more worsely influenced than the generations of men that came before. So it's kind of horrific to imagine what violence will be perpetrated on women and girls, as a result. And actually some of those young men won't even realise.
That's violence.
It's violence.
Yeah.
Like, this is scary now. Yeah. We're in new territory.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a bit stuck, I think, by the constant hard work and yet really, really rewarding work and life-changing work for all of the individuals that we're working with and all the lives that we're saving. day in, day out, week in, week out. So the grassroots work. And yet this online keyboard warrior work, which seems to be more and more taking a hold of political agendas, media agendas, which fill up our days and our weeks and our country's, focus. I think if something is being planned for 16 days next year, 2024, we need men's groups marching. Not that we're organising it for them or anything like that. I know we've enough work to be doing, but get them to stand up and own the days and start, what's wrong? Why aren't they doing that? What do they need? Do they need the permission of the women's sector? Do they need I don't know. And you probably are sick of trying to get them to do it, and I'm sorry, because it's not my area of work precisely. So, Anyway, that's what I'm left with. But
thanks, Claire.
Somehow that we are doing great work through it all. Yeah.
Okay. Eileen, I'll come to you next.
Okay. Couple of things is going through my head. We're having this conversation, and yes, it's on the agenda now. We've got a moment. But we got that moment because women were being murdered. Right? Yeah. When women are not being murdered, we're off the agenda, and that's the sad state of facts. There is great work that's happening on the ground, I have to say. Any of the rallies that I go to and Reclaim the Night, there will be as much men there as what there will be women in the north. But the other thing that I see coming through, and delighted that I'm seeing coming through, is our youth forums. Our youth forums are supporting these things, young men and young women. We're probably successful at doing it on International Women's Day, and we're very successful at doing it Gay Pride. But we need that type of... And the other thing too, I'm coming across more and more younger women who don't even know that they're being controlled.
Yeah.
I spoke to a young girl the other day, and she was telling me what was happening. I said, "What the fuck? He's trying to control you. It's not about that child at all. It's about stopping you doing what you want to do, but using the child as the bait." I said, "Get the solicitor."
But Eileen, isn't it so important that you are based in the community to have those conversations?
Well, yes, and but we're only reaching the people who come into our centres.
Yeah.
Those are the people. I remember doing a personal development course in women's aid. I done it through Women's Tech, and there was 18 women in that room, and I was humbled. I'm in the room teaching them in confidence and self-esteem, and these were women. I have to say, what really hit me was a lot of these women stayed 25 years in a relationship being abused in more than one type of form, but because of women being women, they wanted their children reared up and out of the house before they left. Now they're in a different mindset once they've done it. Why did I stick that and put my kids through that all those years? But when you're in that situation, you're more concerned about your kids and getting the kids reared and doing those things. So I think we have the means. We have the means within this room, but we also have the means of the networks. And I think networks is crucial.
Yeah.
Right across this whole island. I would be involved in about 5 or 6. My job's network coordinator. But there's no point in having one network if it's not talking to that network, it's not talking to that network. And I would love to see a list of all the networks across this island and send 2 representatives from each of those networks into a room.
Yeah.
Because we're reinventing the wheel a whole lot of times.
Yeah, there's work going on.
No need to reinvent the wheel if we all are speaking from the same... We say hymn book. I don't know what you say down south, but hymn book, right? There's something I've got.
No, not that far apart,
right?
Thank you,
Eileen. Alva's hymn book is different.
I can imagine. But, because I'm on all these different networks, and we're all talking about the same thing, but them networks are not joining up. We have fantastic networks doing fantastic work, But one network doesn't know what the other networks do. So and I think that's the way to move forward.
That's important. When we think about what that all-island strategy might look like, we need to know who all the players are. Thanks, Eileen. Thanks very much. Anne, I'll come to you next.
I know it's mentioned in the space about men being role models, then I think about my own community, my own organisation, and we had a group, one man that I was seen as a role model in the community, with others, stood up in the campaign around 16 Days Action and said domestic violence is wrong. Got a group of men into space, got training on domestic violence and gender-based violence. So, we're on the right path, but it's to build on that.
Yeah.
I think there is an issue around gender equality versus race discrimination. And my own lived experience of working as a member of the travel community and as a community development worker, and I do work at a local, regional, national level, and met a lot of different women organisations who works with women's domestic violence, especially within the travel movement. And the experiences of travel women aren't captured while accessing services and how they progress through the services. And we know that's not captured, so hopefully through Paddy Point, capture them lived reality experience of travel women. And it's a sad thing to say, and I have to say it in All Ireland Women's Forum, when a travel woman goes into, and this is lived experience and working on the grassroots level, going in looking for a service and a black eye and busted mouth, she has to prove, and maybe came to Donegal because that's where her family circle was, prove, what Gardaí, give me the name of the Gardaí, give me the list, the number of the Garda station you contacted, are not believed. And unfortunately to say, 50% of people making decisions and saying these things are women, within that sector, depending on the life of women. So I think gender equality, I think women, we all stand for gender equality, but there is an issue when it comes to ethnic minority groups of being believed, people's unconscious bias and prejudice and stereotypical views set in, you may believe as you be a local authority, I believe in gender equality, but when it comes to different ethnic minority women, and particular travellers and Roma, women are questioning their ability, are they telling the truth? And they could show up with busted mouths and noses. And I think that's a sad day. Even our own gender.
It's gender,
that's lived experiences.
Thanks very much. Salome, I might come to you first, and then Orla.
So thank you for doing it. And actually, I've been thinking a lot, and it's really looking at how do we get to zero tolerance, regardless of where we are from, whether north, south, or I go back to Kenya and experience the same. And for me, when I look at where Ireland has come from, let me not look at Kenya because we are still struggling. Where Ireland has come from, everything that has changed in terms of women's life, and actually even changing the constitution and trying to do everything, it has been done so by women. And so if we leave the responsibility of we can't do it, then I'm very challenged. Because the same women have really given me hope of a better life in every aspect based on what has happened in Ireland in the few years. So for me, I see if you're going to work towards zero tolerance, that us as women have to lead, for anything to happen. If we really want this change, if we want to have that zero tolerance, we have to design how we are going to reach to that zero tolerance without thinking, are those men there? But yet we put them at the middle of it. That's how I see it. Otherwise, we'll still be like this for a long time. But there's a need for us as women to come together and decide how do we put those men. Not leave those men to decide on how they're going to solve the problem that we have, but actually how do we make them.
Right.
We've spoken of so many things, and there are so many other things that we will not even speak within the time that we are here in this meeting. Mainly because, in 2010, our organization AkiDwA carried out a research of women who were being taken advantage by the managers of the accommodation centers who are supposed to be protecting them. And yet they're the ones who are sexually exploiting them. When we reported this to the authority, the people who were in charge of people seeking international protection, we were told if we are telling tales, we'll be in for it. And I'm saying this without fear, because I was told that, and I was very intimidated. Imagine a migrant woman like me, being told that. It's my life, it's everything. And we had to go back to the issue of solidarity. And Joanna said that actually about solidarity very well. The solidarity was with the National Women Council, was with other people to actually come with us and stand by with us, to be able to feel like we are comfortable to still work with these women, to be able to tell the stories. So if we are going to do any campaign, we have to remember about, the father left behind or leaving no one behind. We have to think about that there are so many issues that we do not represent in this group, because we also have women with the disability, and all these issues and intersectionality are coming quite often. So it's very, very important that we move in that idea of or strategy of, working in solidarity and helping each other, but really challenging the patriarchy. I've seen it in Ireland that, when we have few women politicians who actually understand women issues, and we have seen it even with our current Minister for Justice on the DSGBV, how she's committed to the issue of DSGBV. I don't think, and I don't feel that men have been very committed. Men policymakers, men, TDs have been very committed to the issue of DSGBV, like the way I've seen it, with the women, including our MEPs who are fighting it at the European level. So it's also important that we put women, at the center of decision making, at the center of policy making, because maybe we wouldn't have taken so long in Ireland to have these refugees now that we are fighting for now to have, of places like even where I come from in County Offaly, where we don't have, refugees. So what I'm saying is that we need to put the women at the middle of everything. We will not get tired. We have to do it to be able to protect future generations.
Yeah.
Orla,
okay.
Final word to you.
Well, I'm a bit sceptical, I have to say, about the extent to which men will be our allies, but ultimately we lead.
Yeah.
But we do need them as allies. And except I do think, and I think it's one of the things maybe we've learned a bit from some of the campaigns in the Women's Council, that there's lots of spaces at the moment, whether it's about violence against women, sex education, toxic masculinity. It's the same 10 men that are getting named in terms of these are the allies. So there is something, I think, as well, in terms of thinking of role models that are ordinary men. Yeah. Because the work that we have done with young women, when they talk about their role models, they talk about their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, and I think maybe we need to think a bit like that when we think about who are the male allies. But just beyond men, I just think from the conversation that we've just had, it seems to me like there's a real opportunity in the cultural change space for what we can do on an all-island basis. And even about, the big impacts, and because we are all doing sort of separate things. So there's something about how we can bring that together. And even if we start it in a small way, but try to build it on an all-island basis, I definitely think there's an opportunity for that. And I also think that piece about the collective voice of survivors, because there is more in that space, and it's not all about the individual story, but we need to bring that more to the fore in terms of making that cultural change. Because I definitely, I still think there's a huge gap between people's understanding around the impact of the violence, whether it's, street sexual harassment, which has an enormous impact, to, the more extreme forms in terms of violence. So there's definitely something about that.
Okay, well, thanks very much for your contribution. It's obviously an issue that we could probably talk about over the 2 days, if we're honest. And, it's really interesting to hear all the different perspectives. And obviously this means so much to all of us. And we see that it impacts women in every community.
Thank you for listening to this recording of a panel discussion that was held at the All Island Women's Forum Residential. This is part of a series of recordings of the All Island Women's Forum, and this project was funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs.